Yes. What's good, everybody? Welcome back to Veterans Minimum. I'm your host, Nick Dayes at The Lame Shows, where you can find me. I have a very special guest, a returning guest, but a first-time in-studio guest. My guy, David Hill. David, what's going on, man?
What's up, man? So it's so good to be here. After I watched your show on YouTube, and now I'm here. I'm like in the room where it happens. It's cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You've helped me out a lot in this journey, man. And first of all, I want to say thank you for that. And we connected a couple of years ago now when you did that piece for Esquire magazine about sports betting being legalized in New Jersey, New York area. And yeah, man, I just want to I've been really giving people their flowers, to use that expression, while they're here. And once again, from the bottom of my heart, man, I appreciate all that you've done for me, even though you might think you haven't done much, but it means a lot to me.
Well, that's nice of you to say. I appreciate that. And honestly, that piece that I wrote for Esquire, I mean, you helped me just as much. I mean, it was a challenging piece because I had to find people. Most of the people I wrote about in that piece, I found them by just harassing them on the platform of the train and hoping they would talk to me. And luckily, because you were somebody who I got connected with beforehand, you were able to kind of, spend more time with me, walk me through a lot of stuff, and so you were actually very helpful too as well. So, I'm glad that if it paid off for you, that means that it was win-win,
Yeah, there was a sports betting documentary that just released. Snap Call Media, these guys from Toronto, Dan and Matt reached out to me, and they used that piece from your article. And how'd that come about? The article and you diving into that area of New Jersey, New York, the legalization of it.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit last time I was on your show, but I had written a piece for The Ringer about a guy named Spanky. Spanky's like one of the top sports bettors in America. He's a huge sharp player. He pumps a lot of money through a lot of different books around the world. And I profiled him. The Ringer had initially asked if I would write something about how gambling in New Jersey, sports gambling in New Jersey, was going to affect like bookies or whatever. But what I found, I wanted to tell this other story because I didn't think that it was really going to have much of an impact on bookies. And I thought it'd be more interesting to talk about how it was impacting gamblers, right? And at the time, Spanky was going through this thing where he was getting kicked out of all the books in New Jersey, right? Like no one was letting him bet because he was winning. And he was kind of, on a warpath about it. So I wanted to write about him. And it took me some time to get, I'm telling you the whole Spanky story or whatever, but like it took him some time to trust me. But then once he decided he trusted me and he was interested in doing the story, not to promote him so much, but to kind of get the word out about how much these sports books didn't let people win. We ended up doing this thing where he gave me like $150K in cash and sent me out to the casinos to bet to see how quickly I'd get kicked out if I won.
That's a lot of trust to just give you.
No shit, I know. It was the weirdest thing, sitting in my hotel room with this literally a backpack filled with cash. And it's funny because when he first gave me the bag and because he's banned, he can't even walk in these places, right? So he gives it to me on the boardwalk. He snaps some pictures of me and texts them to his friends. And he's like, "I just gave this stranger $150K."
Yo, crazy.
But yeah, so I wrote this story, and the story did well. And I think that what it did was it every other publication out there that was looking for a story about New Jersey sports betting started reaching out to me saying, "Hey, can you write something for us?" Because nobody really, a lot of places wanted a story but didn't know much about gambling. And I had been kind of making a name for myself on this beat. I had been writing about gambling for a minute. And that story just came out at the right time. So Esquire is one of a number of places that reached out to me around that time and said, "We'd like to do a piece on gambling." Esquire actually had the idea to do the Jersey, kind of the people crossing the border story. The editor who edited that piece had read some interview with Chris Christie where he made a reference to friends of his betting at the the rest stop, the stop on the turnpike. And the editor was like, "Is this true? Does this really happen? I think it'd be cool to write a story about people that do this." And so I said, "Yeah, it definitely happens. I do it."
Yeah.
So they actually brought the idea to me, and and I ended up hanging around. That was, I think it was NFL opening weekend, and I just hung around in the Hoboken on the platform, harassing people, asking them if they'd talk to me about their bets. And and I met you because I think I put something on Twitter. I think I tweeted something like, "Hey, I'm looking for people to do this," and like a lot of your listeners started DMing me and tweeting me, and they were like, "You got to talk to this guy," you know. So they all were like, "You know, talk to him." So I reached out to you, and you were like more than helpful.
You know what's crazy about that? I didn't see that tweet, and then so I wake up at 3 a.m. for work, and the reason why we met up at the time that we met up is because I sleep until 3, so I get home at around 11:30 noon, and then I sleep until 3, so I could get the second part of my day going. And I just remember waking up and I had like 15, 20 notifications. My Discord people, where if you're a Patreon member, you're in the Discord, everybody's DMing me, yo, you gotta hit up this guy, And then I saw it and I was like, oh, I'm actually perfect for this thing, you know? Hopefully he reaches back, and then before you know it, now you're here on the show.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, you know, you were the first person I talked to on that thing, and at the time I talked to you, I was super nervous that I wasn't going to find anybody. Basically, that people weren't going to talk to me, you know, because it's a hard thing as a journalist to walk up to somebody and be like, oh, hey, what do you do? Especially since I'm having to look at what they're doing on their phone. I mean, it was so invasive. I was being so, you know, like...
kind of creepy in a way.
Yeah, totally. And I was uncomfortable about it. I didn't know how it was going to go, and I was nervous about it. So I was glad to get to talk to you because I thought, well, at least there's Nick, and like he's great, and he's giving me a lot of good material here. So at least I have this if everybody else refuses to talk to me. But I think you also helped me get a little more comfortable and feel like, okay, I can, you know, like this will be all right, because it wasn't the kind of thing I typically do as a writer. You know what I mean? Like go do this kind of man on the street thing, just like, and the whole piece was just me. I mean, I spent days and days on that platform, just walking up to people and being like, "Are you betting right now?" Which people are like, "What? Fuck you! Get the fuck away from me!" But I was surprised at how many people did want to talk. There were a few who were like, "I don't want to talk to you," but a lot of people were totally like, "Oh yeah," you know, they were like, "I do this," and let me tell you all about it, you know? So I got enough to write the piece in the end, and I was glad because I was nervous as hell about it.
It seems as if the sports betting community is first of all, it's a big community. I've always said that it's the giant elephant in the room that people tend to ignore, even though they know it's there. With it being legalized, the stigma is starting to not leave entirely, but it's diminishing a little bit. People are more comfortable talking about it. I mean, even in the documentary that I was a part of, I featured my father. And my parents were very, whoa, let's not celebrate this. You know, growing up, it was something that my father and I really bonded over. And it was something that we spoke about, too, where just he'd come up to me. And even if, you know, you would have those fights with your dad, like young kid, where you thought you had all the answers to the test. And then we wouldn't talk for 2-3 days. And he'd come up and he'd be like, buddy, think the Pats covered by 7, and then before you know it's like we didn't even think about why were we fighting, why were we not talking for a couple days. So it was something, weirdly enough, David, that sports betting actually brought my father and I closer together. And now through this show, number one, I don't gamble as much as I used to. I still hit my futures, and it was something that we had. I think we both were on Chiefs Eagles. I talked to you at the throw, so I apologize for that. You know, Carson Wentz got hurt, man. There's nothing I can do about that. But I love the futures market. I think that's my favorite thing to sort of dictate and dump my money into. I really need to like a game for me to venture out to Jersey. And I know about that stop, that Vince Lombardi way. My friends and I, to this day, when we go for UFC events, we'll pull up over there in the gas station, hang out, or if we end up going to FanDuel anyway. But it is a weird approach because I've done man on the streets videos in the past, but we've had a camera. And people are just naturally curious. When they see a camera, they're interested in it. But you just approaching people and being like, "Hey, buddy, what are you doing over there? What's on your phone?"
Were you gambling?
Yeah, I could see how it might be awkward, or they might be like, "Oh, is this guy like 5-0, or is he a Fed or something?"
Some of the people I talked to were like nervous that because they were there on their lunch break or whatever, and they were like playing hooky from work. They didn't want me to use their name in the piece because they're like, "I don't want my boss to know I was over here."
Yeah, this is why you took 30 minutes when you're supposed to take 20.
Because they're all coming over from the city. Yeah. You know? And it's Hoboken's like the first stop, right? So that's why everybody was going to Hoboken. That's why that was the spot. So some people, I kept their name out of the piece just because they didn't want their name in there because they were nervous about blowback or something.
I was so excited to talk to you and to see you. I didn't even really mention exactly what you do. It's an issue that I have introducing people, but author, gambler, podcaster, freelance writer. How would you describe yourself?
You know, I define myself as a writer. You know, I feel like I'm a writer first and foremost. I'm doing this podcast now, but it's not something I ever really thought I set out to do. You know what I mean? And I don't. I just think that what's interesting is that as a writer, podcasting is just a medium now that you have to, you have to like learn and understand and be a part of, because it's a way that people are consuming stories, and so it's just another place for me to tell stories. But I think I'm a writer, a storyteller. I don't think of myself as like a producer or anything like that.
Have you noticed any big differences between the two? The writing, journalistic, traditional, and then now this new form of media being podcasting?
Yeah. Well, my podcast is it's like a narrative podcast, right?
By the way, I love it.
Thank you.
Gamblers was amazing. My favorite one was on Phil Galfond, the poker player. We're going to dive into that in just a second. But yeah, man, I noticed that one was very different from other podcasts that I've consumed because it's basically a documentary in audio form, which is super interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot more like documentary film or something in that respect. I mean, it's like, a narrative podcast is like different than like an interview podcast like yours, because I have to write a script, and so there is a lot of writing involved. So I'm still writing, but it's a different type of writing than I was used to, And when I first started the show, I really started writing my scripts. I could tell that I was writing like too much voiceover, because I'm used to when I write a written feature, it's mostly in my voice, and then there'll be quotes from people here and there that I use to support the things that I'm saying. But in the podcast script, it had to be the opposite. I can't speak as much. I have to use the quotes. It's mostly quotes from the people I'm doing the story on, with my voice coming in to support that everyone. So it's like the inverse of what a feature would be. And it took me a while to learn that and to figure that out. But so it's a totally different type of writing. And it's all I'm writing is my voiceover. So I also have to write like I speak, which is not the way that I would write, to be read. Do you know what I mean? Like if I'm writing a written piece, there's a language that is different when you're writing to be read than when I'm writing a script that's going to be spoken, because when I'm reading the script in Gamblers, it has to sound natural. If it doesn't sound natural, it just sounds like I'm reading. And so I had to learn how to write in my own real spoken voice, which was harder than you'd think. It's kind of tough to do that because you don't consciously think about that when you're typing, when you're writing it all out,
Would you say it was like reading tweets?
I don't know. It's, I don't know. I maybe have a different voice on Twitter than I do on the podcast or when I'm writing, but it is a little bit like, it is the fact that it's different. It is important. The fact that our voice sounds different on different platforms, I think, is key here, because it's the way our brain kind of processes this. If I was able to just if I did an interview show, right, like your show, then it would be more, like that's going to be closest to who I really am, right? Like this is like when you're on your show, you are this is like you know what I mean? Because you're just talking to your friends, and it's not scripted, it's unfiltered, it's like totally like in the moment.
Just to pull the curtain back, this is the most preparation that I put when I do shows like this.
Right.
I just give you an idea of what the topics are going to be, and because I like to treat these like a conversation. Yeah. If us two were to go to a bar, we would never run out of things to say.
And that's why I think people who like podcasts, who become fans of a podcast, I include myself in this, you start to feel like you have a friendship with the people on the show. It feels like you're listening in on a conversation with your friends. You're not participating in a conversation because you're just listening. But if you listen to those conversations long enough, you start to feel like you're a part of that. You feel like you have a relationship with that person, that they're your friend, you understand them. And that's a kind of a key to like having an audience as a podcaster, I think. But a show like mine I don't have that, right? Like as the sort of narrator of Gamblers, I'm not. The listeners of that show in fact, they probably hate my voice. You know what I mean? Like you could love that show and hate me, because the show's not about me. You know what I mean? I have very little to do with it. It's about these people that I'm profiling, and my voice is just kind of helping, move the story along. And so I don't have to feel like, I feel some pressure to like sound natural or whatever, but like at the end of the day, I'm not a character in the show, You're
kind of just driving the car.
Yeah, it's like or
are you more of a passenger?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know. I think that I'm probably driving the car because I'm moving the beats of the story along. Like each beat is going to be sort of introduced and it's introed and outroed by like some VO from me. So I'm probably driving the car, but what I hope to capture in each episode is that the person I'm doing the episode on, that you get to see them as a real person. That you can sort of feel that sort of. You can feel that genuineness from them rather than me. Although I try to be as genuine as I can, right? It's weird. It's a weird form that I'm still learning. I mean, we only did 7 episodes, so I'm still figuring it out.
How did Gamblers come about? Because the Ringer is it's a big time network. It's a big time organization, and I was super pumped for you when I saw it because I'm a big fan of the Ringer. Bill Simmons is one of my inspirations, a guy who I try to sort of mold my stuff around. Him, Rogan are 2 of the guys that I look up to the most in this form of media, and that was dope to be with the Ringer. And I know you've done stuff with them in the past. So how did Gamblers come about?
Yeah, I've been freelancing for them for a long, long time. I mean, I came over with those guys from Grantland, so I used to write for Grantland, and then
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so when they started the Ringer. Sean Finnessy, he invited me to start, pitching them and writing for them from the very beginning of the Ringer. And it's been a place that I've written a lot of long pieces for over the years. And, but again, it's that Spanky story. Once I wrote that story about Spanky, this is around the moment that I think, number one, the Ringer was moving to podcasts. It was a big part of what they were doing. And number two, I didn't know this at the time, but they obviously were talking to Spotify. Like they knew that they were going to make this deal with Spotify. That was all being sort of in the works at that time, but I didn't know any of that. And I wrote the story about sports gambling, and it did well. And then Sean came to me and said, "Do you think that there's like a podcast here?" Obviously because like that's where their money was being made. That's the side of their bread was being buttered on. So he was like, "Do you think there's a podcast here?" I was like, "Definitely." I was like, "What took you so long to ask?" Like I could totally do this. I mean. So he said, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you make a list of like 10 ideas for episodes of people that you would profile or whatever, how you would do this. And so it's like I was ready for that. You know what I mean? Like I already kind of had 10 ideas. It wasn't even hard to put that list together because I had already kind of had this idea in my head about how I could tell more of these kinds of stories. Whether I was going to do it on a podcast or not, I definitely, when you're a freelancer, you eat what you kill. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm always having to think about what's the next idea. And you're going to, you pitch 5 ideas to get one to land or whatever. So like, I always kind of have to have a backlog of ideas of stories I may want to work on anyway. So I kind of had that, but I had to be honest, like as much as I wanted to be asked to do a podcast, I didn't have the first clue about how to do one, but I gave them some ideas. They said, this is great. Let's do it. Let's make a show. And so we started working on the show, and then like maybe not even halfway into production, the pandemic hit, and then I thought the show was dead. I mean, we had only done 3 episodes, and we originally were going to do 8, I think, for that first season. And I had all these crazy ideas, and I mean, there's a lot of travel involved. There's a lot of stuff that I was very excited about, and then we just had to like. I thought we were just going to shut the show down because what were we going to do? We were all locked down where there was going to be no travel. Mm-hmm. And my show is all me, I had to do a lot of travel because I was there with the gambler that I'm profiling. I'm with them, spending time with them day after day, following them around with a microphone, hanging out with them, watching them work. So I couldn't imagine how to do it any other way. And so it just sort of sat there for months where we weren't doing anything. And because we also didn't know back then how long this pandemic was going to last.
I mean, guess what? We still don't know.
Yeah, we still don't know. Yeah. But at the time, we so didn't know that we actually thought, well, maybe by the end of the summer, we could pick this back up. You know what I mean? Like, this is in 2020. This is like early 2020, and we were saying, well, let's just put it all on pause, and then maybe at the end of the summer, we'll be able to like get back into this thing. So once we got into the summer, I realized that's when people started to understand, like, oh, this thing could go on till the 12th of never. Mm. So we said, look, we're either going to do this or not. So I had to rewrite episodes and rethink them and figure out how can I do this remotely? How can I finish this season in my basement? And so some very cool ideas that we had to like totally reshape them. And like the Galfond episode is totally a product of that. Phil was not a part of the original first season. The Galfond challenge started became a thing during the pandemic, really. And I was following it already. And as I was following it, I thought, this could be an episode of my show, right? Like, this could be an episode of Gamblers. This is a really cool story, what's happening right now. And what's great about it is it's all happening online. So I don't have to be there. I could do this episode.
On Twitch.
Yeah, I could do it. We've got the audio from Twitch. I can interview all these people. And it just felt like, it felt like the perfect story to tell during the pandemic. So I reached out to him and I was like, do you want to do this? I'm trying to do this show. This seems like the perfect. So he said yes. And that kind of saved this show in a little bit, because I suddenly thought, okay, I can do this. I can come up with other story ideas that maybe will fit this moment, and the Galfond one was one of those.
Dude, it's funny how the pandemic turned into what was my favorite episode of the bunch. I'm a poker kid, right? I was one of those dudes who thought about dropping out of college at one point because so I used to play on Poker Stars and Full Tilt. And I always liked playing poker, and then it was like around that online boom, right? All these websites coming out left and right. And I put $250 gift card into Poker Stars. And I was playing $20 sit and goes.
What year was this?
2011, right before the whole Black Monday thing. And within those 4 months, I got the $250. I turned it into over $11,000. I was playing $20 sit and goes. So for those that don't know, it's a 10-man game, very quick. They're done in about 45 minutes to an hour. Texas Hold'em, top 3 win money. First place used to be like $140 or whatever it was. And then I was just playing those. And then, 1 or 2 weeks, I've gotten my bankroll up to $500. I'm like, oh, all right, there's something here. Before you know it, I play one of those like satellite tournaments. I win a seed into a bigger contest. It's very similar to DraftKings and FanDuel. That's why you see a lot of these online poker dudes have transitioned into the daily fantasy stuff. So David, I'm over there before you know it. I have $2,000 in my account. It's like middle of January. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Am I like the next Phil Hellmuth? Am I Phil Ivey? Like, before you know it, it's up to $5K. I show my dad. I'm like, yo, I think I'm gonna drop out of college and just do this. He's like, no, let's not get crazy. Like, see how far you could take it. Around my birthday, March 11th, I have over $10,000 on the account. Not even thinking like, oh, let's withdraw it. I'm just like, all right, I'm playing with house money now at this point. And then I just go to open my account one day, like every other online poker dude, and bam, seized.
Yeah.
Black Monday.
Did you ever get it back?
Nope.
They got it all? They didn't give you any of it back?
Nothing.
It should have been on Full Tilt. They all got repaid eventually. It took them years, I think.
Yeah. Maybe if I was older at the time, I probably would have definitely stuck to it.
Did that just crush your poker? You're done with poker at that point?
The whole online thing, dude, even my grades are starting to fall because I was in class just playing. I'd have them be in lecture hall and just BSing, and that's all I thought about was poker. I was even playing a lot throughout neighborhood games, casinos.
Yeah, right.
One time I drove out to Sands, I think in Philly or in Pennsylvania. And I went to a $250 tournament, sat down, second hand I was out. Rebought, 3 hands after that, out again. So I spent about $500 and 8-hour commute for about 4.5 minutes at a poker table.
Yeah.
The trials and tribulations of playing poker.
Yeah, totally. And, it's wild because so many people experienced that, right? Where they ran up a big number and then said, this is just what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Right? And some people were actually able to do it. Phil, in his story, he kept running it up and it never stopped. And he did, make millions and, was very successful. A lot of people, though, didn't. And they ran up a big number and then they ran it right back down, right? Because there's variance and people don't account for that. And they misjudge what's the long run, And, but I think that with daily fantasy or poker or even with, a lot of what we see now with sports betting in new markets where there's a lot of bonuses is that people who are kind of early to market with this stuff, the early adopters of this stuff, suck up a lot of easy money, right? It was like that with online poker too. In the early days of online poker, it was just free money. There were so many people that didn't know how to play. There was so much rake back and bonuses and stuff you could get that just knowing a little bit could make you, truckloads of money. And then but it gets tougher, right? And you can't just like rest on your laurels. You have to keep getting better and better and keep up with it. And that's what the Phil story is kind of about, is about how like technology was changing the game in ways that was difficult for him to keep up with because of poker solvers and things like that. And I thought that was one of the interesting kind of dynamics in his story was how he was once kind of a young upstart that took the game away from an older generation, and then it didn't take long for him to find himself in the older generation because of how quickly technology moves things now, right? Like poker was the same game from 1970 till 2003. Mm-hmm. It was the same game. And nobody had reinvented it. The way to play, the like optimal way to play, the sort of accepted common wisdom about poker was unchanged for like 30 years. And then when these guys come in 2003 and start changing the game and
the Chris Moneymaker era,
yeah, during that, but also the online era, really.
Right? Yeah, that's true.
And the guys who were playing on the internet were playing so many more hands than the older generation was ever able to, playing over the table. So like the idea that you could play 1,000,000 hands of poker was wild, right?
Yeah.
It would take a lifetime to play that many hands, but these kids were doing 10 tables at a time. So they were getting good really, really fast. So technology was enabling this like speeding up of like the of the understanding of the game. And what's weird about Phil is by the time he's in his 30s, now he's in the older generation. He took it away from these guys who were like in their 70s or whatever, and now he's finding that like there's an even younger generation coming in who have changed the game in ways that they're going to dominate him unless he can adapt. And that's kind of true about a lot of things, right? Like daily fantasy was the same thing where like, people who got in on daily fantasy early made a lot of easy money, and they were like, oh, there's so many people who don't know what they're doing. It's so easy to make money here. But quickly the cream separated from the crop, with that top group of daily fantasy players, because there's like an even smaller number of winners who like just were able to like create computer, they were able to create models and programs and stuff.
Excel sheets, yeah.
And they were able to like have zillions of accounts and like and they would buy up all the different entries. So the top like 1% of the top 10% took all the money out and made it really hard for anybody to beat it. And so that kind of is just how technology works now, is that like you get in early, you can make some easy money, but it's not going to stay. It's not going to stay unless you can like really hustle hard and be at that sort of real right on the edge, right on the cutting edge. If you're not there, you're eventually going to get beat by the people who are. And that's true in a lot of gambling. I mean, it's like that in like horse racing. It's like that with sports gambling. I mean, there's just a very small number of people that are on that edge who are winning so much. And who are they winning it from? They're winning it from the rest of us,
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back a little bit to the Chris Moneymaker, because I think he might be, if you were building a Mount Rushmore in poker and in gambling, I feel as if his face needs to be on there for the doors that he opened up. And is it fair to say that he was just your average Joe?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Enters online, wins a ticket to the main event, World Series of Poker main event, which is the biggest prize pool, first place prize, and he ends up taking it down.
Yeah.
And then when you dive into his story, I think he was like a teacher or an accountant.
He was an accountant.
And then everybody's like, oh, I'm an accountant. I'm a sanitation guy. I could enter this, hypothetically speaking, and win it. And then that opened up the door to a lot of new people coming through the floodgates of the poker era.
Yeah.
And then you had all the online stuff too. And you mentioned something in passing before, which I couldn't agree with you more, that if you're a dude who grew up in the era of, in the 70s, 80s, and it's now 2010, you're sitting across the table from me, and I'm a 21-year-old kid, and I've been playing on full tilt in Poker Stars. Dude, I have 8 to 10 screens up. I had 10 screens up at one time. There was a point where I was taking my mom's laptop just to have another laptop along with mine. And I'm playing all these hands, and I've seen tens of thousands of hands daily. Where if you're going to a traditional game at a casino, what's the most you think in a 5-hour span you would see?
You're gonna see probably 25 to 35 hands in an hour.
Yeah.
at that one table. So if
As
you
a,
play
as
5
opposed,
hours, you're going to see 150 hands. If you're lucky, you'll probably see less because of dealer changes and things like that.
yeah. And
So you see 100 hands.
yeah, and then before you know it, I also think the evolution of the hands that people were playing changed as well. Of
course.
Like I started hearing terms of two gappers, right? Where it's like if you have a 5 and an 8 of hearts, and you're on the button, it's like that's actually a pretty strong hand. If like a 6-7 falls before you know you're open ended, and it's like the one gapper, things along the line like that. Like if you have an ace and it's suited, like no matter what, play the flop because it might be on a flush draw. It's like before you know it, the hands are just changing. I remember one time vividly, I played 7-9 of diamonds. And I was big blind. One of the biggest hands I ever won. You know how they say you always remember the biggest hands you've won and the biggest hands you've lost? Mm-hmm. And I remember the lady at the Borgata being angry at me that I played it. She's like, why are you playing? That makes no sense. I'm coming in with queens. Why are you playing that? And I was like, well, I was big blind. I'm already pot committed. And, it's a strong hand. And she was not thrilled that I said it's a strong hand. But then you just start seeing the evolution of just different hands that who knows. I wasn't around in the 80s. Who knows if people play a 7-9 suited?
Yeah, well, I started playing poker in the 90s, right, when I was in college. And my introduction to poker was reading books about poker because I was always a games player. I always liked games. I like gambling. And I started reading books about poker. But back then, when I got into poker in the 90s, you could not find a no-limit game. It was like a unicorn. The idea that people played no-limit cash games was ridiculous. Like I still remember the first time I saw a live no limit hold'em game was in Reno, Nevada at the Excalibur, and I was walking through the casino, and I just stopped dead in my tracks, and I looked at this table, and I was like, "What is all that? They have so much money on the table. What are they playing? Oh, they're playing no limit hold'em." And I just stood and watched them because I'd never seen a no limit game in the wild, only in tournaments, Because everyone played Limit Hold'em. That's what I came up playing. Everyone played Limit Hold'em. The top players in the world, the guys who won the World Series of Poker tournament, playing No Limit, would then take that money and then go play Limit Hold'em. That's what everyone played. And so everyone learned that game. Really, what the internet poker and what the moneymaker boom did was it brought No Limit Hold'em cash games into the casinos in a big way. And it became the game that everybody wanted to play and everybody was learning. And that alone attributed to how bad so many people were at it because no one ever played it. So few people had ever played live No Limit Hold'em. There's just I cannot overemphasize how few people in America or in the world had ever played live cash No Limit Hold'em prior to the early 2000s. It just was such a rare thing. And then it was suddenly everywhere. And now you can't find Limit Hold'em. You know what I mean? Now it's like
that's what I was saying. As you're saying all this, and you're absolutely right. People listening to this that are familiar with poker, they're like, "What is this guy talking about?" All you see now is No Limit.
Yeah, no, it's like you could not find a game, and now it's like it's everywhere. I remember the first time I played No Limit Hold'em. Pot Limit Hold'em was a thing in New York City, in the clubs in New York City. There were two games. There were limit games. Like I played at the Diamond Club a lot, which was kind of maybe the more proletarian of the poker clubs in New York City. If you've ever seen the movie Rounders, okay, so the two clubs in Rounders are the Mayfair and Teddy KGB's. Those are loosely based on two real clubs in New York. The Mayfair would be the Mayfair would be the Chesterfield, which is the like fancy club, and then Teddy's place was like the Diamond Club. And I played at the Diamond Club. It's a little bit more of like it's like where like bus drivers would come and play. Like so there was like a lot of low limit hold'em there. Like I think the game there was 2-4 or 3-6. No, it was like 3-6 or 4-8 or something like that with dollar chips. And then there'd be a 10-20 limit game. And then there was a pot limit game. And the pot limit game was the big game. And like all the big players were playing in that game. And pot limit was about as big of a big bet game as you could find, whether you're in the city, in Atlantic City, or anywhere. And then it became No Limit Hold'em after TV and tournaments on TV. Because No Limit was a game you played in tournaments. It was like a high variance game. And people who learned it and mastered it so that they could play in these tournaments, but they never played it really cash. After tournaments became the thing was televised, that's the game people wanted to play because it's what they were watching on TV. So that's what they expected in the casinos, and casinos started spreading it. The other thing that's kind of wild is no one had poker rooms in the 90s and early aughts. No casinos had poker rooms. It was considered a waste of real estate to have poker rooms.
Well, also the casino doesn't really benefit from poker
Right.
rooms.
Not like they would for a bunch of slot machines in that same space.
Yeah, I always say that the purest game that you could play at a casino is poker. My friends are fascinated because when I go to casinos, and my buddies and I, outside of last year, we do an annual Vegas trip every year. And poker, I like to describe it as a game that sucks to go if you're going with friends. Because if us two and five other buddies were to go to Atlantic City for a weekend, I don't want to go and play poker. I'm going to disappear from you guys 5-6 hours. It's not a fun game. You can't
Right.
stay over. I can't show you, hey, man, look at my hand.
Right.
You're going to give it away to the rest of the table. So it's a game that sucks if you're going with a group. That's why I would have poker weekends with my buddy Espo. We say, look, once a month, let's take like $300-$400 and we'll go and play. The Golden Nugget used to have a $150 buy-in daily tournament. And, $3,000-$4,000 first place, 10 to 12 tables will fill up. So we do that like once a month because it was an every Saturday thing.
Yeah.
And it's a game that's not fun if you're going with a crowd, right? It's not blackjack. It's not
Right.
craps, which is, I think, the best game to play with a group of people.
Without a doubt.
And the casino there, it's peer-to-peer betting. If us two sit at a table, I'm trying to take David's money. The dealer and the casino have nothing to do with it. They take a little bit, or
They rake the pot.
Yeah, they rake and you tip the dealer. But for the most part, the casino doesn't suffer a loss, which is why I think early on, and there's still some casinos that don't have poker rooms.
No, there are. There weren't in the mid aughts, but a lot of those poker rooms have disappeared because it's like we're on the wave of like when poker was really shooting up in popularity. I'd say 2006. There were poker rooms everywhere. Everybody had poker because everybody wanted it because that's what people wanted to play. And so the idea was that by offering poker, you'd get gamblers in your casino, and then they hopefully would play slot machines and other things that the casinos make a lot of money on, which I think is still true. I think that it's an amenity. Sports betting's the same way. Casinos don't make a ton of money off of sports betting. In fact, they have risk. Even though they're dealing 11 to 10 in the sports book, the sports book could have a loss.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? The blackjack tables will not have a loss. You know what I mean? In the aggregate, over the long run, they are going to win the money because it's just they have a much higher edge at the table games. But at sports betting, it's a much harder thing. So casinos offer sports betting purely as an amenity to their guests to get gamblers in there so that they'll hopefully play things that have a higher house edge. Poker's the same thing. And it worked when poker was at its height of popularity. But, it's come down a bit. It's nowhere near as low as it was in the 90s when poker was such an obscure thing. But it's not what it was in 2006 either.
You read my mind on a question I wanted to ask you. And after talking with Phil Galfond, which again, that was my favorite one of the gamblers because, he's a household name to me as someone that was a poker fan. Mm-hmm. And, the roller coaster of emotions that you go through, and I'm sure you probably got this with all the gamblers, right? Like to be a gambler as your profession, man, you're playing with your livelihood every time that you go and you play something. And if you go on tilt, which is when you kind of lose control, and then before you know it, it could get sour. What is the current state of poker right now in 2021? And I know it might be a little difficult because, we've had the pandemic and I haven't been to a casino in a very long time, so I'm not familiar with what the poker tables are like. So what have you, what's the word on the streets?
Well, you mean like pandemic poker is happening, and they've got these they put these plexiglass things on the tables that separate the players from each other, and then you can get your hands underneath them to push the chips out and everything. Wow. But you're basically in this bubble. So poker, and they've been playing like that since the casinos reopened, which has been a minute now. They opened at limited capacity, and now they're at, I think in Vegas, they might be at, I think they went either from 25 to 35 or they went from 35 to 50. But, they're at an increased capacity now. And but poker's been happening for a bit. Live poker's been happening in Vegas for a bit now with those kinds of weird plexiglass things on the tables. The state of poker is bad. I mean, it's even before the pandemic, I'd say that, poker, I don't know what you could judge it on. I mean, the number of people that enter tournaments, big tournaments, has been going down. It's rebounded a little bit, but, poker's down from its high water mark from the days when, and here's why. Here's the reason why poker's down. Because of Black Friday, because of the unlawful internet gaming enforcement act. the federal law that was passed with the Patriot Act in order to shut down internet gambling in the United States. That killed off the poker economy because people were introduced to poker by playing online, and they then took that to the casinos, right? So you're a perfect example. I mean, there were a lot of people like that who built their bankroll on the internet. And then they wanted to go to Borgata, and then they wanted to go to Vegas, and that's like the big show. Like, I built this bankroll, now I'm going to go play live poker with it. That's what everyone wanted to do. That's also how tournament pools work. The reason that there were so many people, were there 8,000 people in the 2006 main event in the World Series? That's like a small city. The reason there were so many people in that tournament was because they were all being fed there by internet tournaments. People were playing online to satellite their way in. That's how Chris Moneymaker got in 2003. That's impossible now for Americans. There are people now who are playing tournament poker who will go to another country or to one of the two states, I think it's still two, that allow you to play poker online, and that's where they'll stay to play the tournament, right? It's like, so you have to be that serious. There's no more accountants. There's no more school teachers. There's no more like people who are like, just having fun playing poker on the side in the evenings and weekends, and they may get into the big event. The only people who are able to really grind out in poker tournaments are serious professionals who have backers, who have a serious bankroll, and who are willing to uproot their lives. I mean, even in the story about Phil Galfond, he talks about how after Black Friday he had to move his family to British Columbia, right, so that he could continue his career.
Play,
yeah, and so he has to move his whole family there, and it's. So, yeah, that's hurt the game, because there's not as many opportunities for American recreational players. Now, in other countries, it's fine. I mean, a lot of the, internet poker, a lot of the money that is online right now is European players, for the most part, that are make up that community because it's still legal there. And an increasing number of people in New Jersey and Nevada are playing it kind of recreationally, but it won't be like it was until we get rid of the UIGAA. We have to change that law and bring back online poker in the United States.
Something very similar happened with daily fantasy, where New York came down and they outlawed it for a little bit, and then it got overturned because the companies DraftKings and FanDuel, I think it was a high number of their users were from New York.
Yeah.
So they were really going to bat for it. Do you remember, I believe it was 2000, either 15 or 16, it was week 1, and dude, every other commercial was FanDuel or DraftKings.
Yeah.
And then that's when they were so in the public eye that the feds were like, oh, hold on, what is this? $1 million prize pool every week? Like, oh, let's get a hand of it. And then they sort of did it to themselves, where they wanted all the attention, and then before you know it, you have a bird's eye view on everything that you're doing. Do you think that Black Friday thing was the right call in hindsight because of all the money that was available if you were to regulate it? That's the big thing that I've always been saying about sports betting. In the documentary, there was a senator of New York that said that close to $900 million was wagered in New Jersey last year during the football season, only by New York registered players that have to commute in there. So your state is losing a lot of money by you not welcoming this sports betting thing. Right now, currently, only 3 states in the whole U.S. have not attempted or submitted a bill to be passed on sports betting. My hot take, David, for years was, we're going 50 for 50. It's too economically beneficial for all parties involved. Just think of what's happened in Jersey, the jobs that are created. You got people answering phones. You got people working at the windows. You create all these other jobs, and now it's regulated where I feel as if I'm a gambler at heart, but I don't even know I love gambling. I'm not betting every weekend, even though it's legal. So do you think going back to that Black Friday decision, hindsight, obviously 2020, was that the right call to pull the plug on it?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I struggle to understand what the rationale can be outside of moralistic arguments, right? I mean, other than saying that gambling is a moral and social ill, I don't know how we could justify a legal prohibition on it.